truth, logic, common sense, that good feeling, and yes, even a little psychoanalysis, as we are once again together, you and I, to discuss Chad and Lori Daybell. It's Saturday night. You know what that means? That means old KJ's going to sing something to you. You ready for it? It might have something to do with what we're going to talk about tonight. Love, look what you've done to me. I never thought I'd fall again so easily. Whoa, love, you wouldn't lie to me, leading me to feel this way. Love? Y'all think Chad and Lori's got love for one another? You know, they're both in jail cells, obviously, and they're going to prison, whether it's death row or life in prison. One or the other, they are going to be incarcerated. And when it comes to love, y'all, you gotta wonder how they're going to survive their marriage, huh? Is that an interesting topic for us all to discuss tonight? Well, we're going to go through that. We're going to look at it because this last hearing we had, you had Chad and Lori for the first time coming together. There was sources saying that they looked at each other. Maybe it was briefly. Maybe it was on and off. And then you also had some other reports that Chad just looked straight ahead. And I could almost see him doing that. His attorney, John Pryor, probably told him to look straight ahead. Don't look at Lori. He probably sat there the whole time thinking to himself, I cannot believe that hoe is even in this room with me right now, you know, and she's probably thinking that nasty man, you know what I'm saying? But then again, they could be sitting there together and they could look across to each other and, remember the good old days of James and Elena. Let me tell you something, folks. That damn asshole and that damn hussy, they ain't gonna get to play role-playing games anymore unless they meet somebody in prison. They're not gonna get to feel that rush of the sexual pleasure that they had with each other, bumping and grinding against each other at Charles Vallow's house or any other time in hotel rooms, wherever the heck they were at. These two thought that their sexual attraction and the things they were doing to one another sexually was some kind of divine, powerful thing. Joining forces, wonder powers, activate. Give me a break. These two were horny as hell. These two were horny not only for sexual pleasure, but for power, status. They wanted to pretend all this stuff. And now they're going to sit in jail cells and they're going to go to prison and they're going to have to deal with other people, whether it's in their little community, whatever it is. So I wanted to bring up the content of what's it going to be like for them as they serve out their prison sentences. I want to kind of just explore that a little bit. And we've already talked about it. Why haven't they divorced already? You think they'll stay married the rest of their lives as they're sitting on death row or life in prison? So I really got to looking through a lot of research that I had done on jails and prisons. And I thought, well, let me add a component to that. What if you're married to someone who's going to spend the rest of their life in prison and you yourself are away from them? At some point, y'all, and we just need to accept it, at some point when this case is adjudicated and they're convicted and sent off to whatever prison they're going to be in, they're going to be allowed to send letters to one another or have phone calls with one another. And that's if their marriage is going to last. You know, you just don't know what's going to happen with all that. But I thought, well, we need a foundation. We need some empirical, factual information about prisoners, their frame of thinking, whether it's psychoanalysis. I don't usually throw too much psychoanalysis into anything. Psychology is very important. And so I looked at several things that I wanted to lay out there foundationally before we get into the question of, will Chad and Lori's marriage last? And we'll see how this goes. But first we have to say, well, these two people, they're sitting life in prison or death row, right? What is their frame of mind going to be? What's it going to be? Because you can't say, well, they're going to divorce when they go to prison and not give reasons why that person feels the way they do, what's inside of them at the time. So let's get to it. The 5 stages of incarceration, y'all. Does that sound familiar to y'all? Let me tell you what, that's the same as the 5 stages of grief. It says the 5 stages of incarceration are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And it's derived from the traditional stages of grief outlined by American Swiss psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, okay? So we don't think about that when we've talked about grief in the past. Remember when my mom passed and we discussed grief and the different stages? Well, people that go on to live in prisons for the rest of their life, they go through these stages of incarceration, i.e., it's a form of grief. They go through it, and we're gonna look through it, and then we're gonna apply it to Chad and Lori. Then we will get to the almighty king and queen's marriage vows and whether they will stay together. These stages are not necessarily linear, since people can flow in and out of them, these different stages, but often an inmate's behavior can be explained by where they are within these stages. Like everyone, inmates are working through a process and are responding to what is happening in their lives. What society especially tends to forget is that inmates are human beings, y'all. They're human beings and they have feelings just like everyone else. And I'm so thankful that even though Chad and Lori are monsters, they're animals in my view, but they are human beings, y'all, that they're going to have to deal with these feelings. I want them to live these feelings in and out of every stage over and over again for the rest of their days. That's what I want. But the 5 stages of incarceration, the first one is denial. This stage begins when a person enters prison and typically lasts 1 to 3 years for those who have sentences of 10 years or more. So you think about that. Chad and Lori are going to be in denial. They're in denial right now, y'all. Trust me when I say Chad and Lori they both have pled not guilty. They think that some snowballs a chance in hell that they're going to get off, they're going to walk. They're not. There's just too much evidence. A mountain of evidence, i.e., a mountain of discovery. And unrelated, just to kind of clue y'all in on this, for lesser sentences, they may be in denial for their entire sentence. Inmates swing from emotions of rebellion to withdrawal and find it hard to believe they're really in prison. They can blame their situation on others, are often callous towards the victims, and we see that right now. Neither one of them act like they give a rat's ass about what they've done to Tammy, JJ, and Tylee, and Charles as well. But we're looking at the Idaho murders here. Let's continue. They blame their situation on others, are often callous toward victims, and have trouble comprehending the seriousness of the consequences. And y'all, do y'all remember when Rob Wood stood up at that one hearing? It was her initial arraignment. He talked about it, and then at the subsequent one where she had the little big ponytail, and even the one where she's sitting low in the chair, when they bring up the death penalty, you don't see any kind of scowl or anything on her face. In some instances, she's even smiling like, yeah, you're not going to be able to put me to death. She's already put on her act, right? She's already been in a mental health facility. Mark Means and Archie both have told her, don't worry, Lori, you won't get the death penalty because you've got a mitigating circumstance of being a nut job, right? But Chad, look at Chad. Chad, he's acted this whole time. He hasn't had any mental evaluations. He's acting like he's straight line, that there's nothing wrong with him. They want to throw out here that this was Lori and Alex. Chad wants to be straight-laced. He wants to go in there acting like there's nothing wrong with him. It's only Lori and Alex did all this. So there you go. These people, they don't even grasp the consequences of everything they've been involved with. I mean, it's one thing for us to sit here and say how despicable it is that both of them would plead not guilty when they know good and damn well they're guilty. This goes back, y'all, to you cannot be forgiven for something that you do not confess. And neither one of them want to confess shit, okay? But denial can also mean disassociation from the situation or simply behaving as if they're leaving sooner than they will actually leave the institution, the prison. So they disassociate when they go to prison. And hey, listen to me. This is factual psychiatric studies, and these are things that happen to people when they go into prison. And the reason I'm bringing this up to you is because we have to have that foundation of the mindset of Chad and Lori before we go into what? Their marriage. Now, this content that I'm bringing to you is actually coming from an anonymous lifer, okay? And this anonymous lifer brings their self into it and talks about their self and what they're feeling as they go through it. And so when I speak of this person and they're talking about their self, you need to understand that there are nuggets of things that we need to apply to Chad and Lori. Where I am housed, there are a number of men who have a couple of years remaining on their sentence who have convinced themselves they won't be there much longer, whatever gets you through the day. And again, Chad and Lori will not have a couple of years left on their sentences. They're going to be in jail for prison for the rest of their life. And so they're definitely not going to be in denial that they're going to get out any day. They're going to have to go through these stages of incarceration over and over again in their life. And for anyone that heard me say that one of acceptance is something that will end all of that roller coaster of those stages, let me tell you what, acceptance can lead right back to denial. Trust me, I've accepted that my mother has passed. But there are times that I go back into it and I'll wake up one day or expect to make a phone call to her or something, and then I'll be in that denial thing again. Now, the next stage of incarceration, besides denial, is anger. When faced with the reality that they can no longer deny the situation, an inmate often becomes angry, may threaten lawsuits, express grievances, or bully weaker people. And I don't see Lori or Chad bullying anyone when they go to prison. They are wusses. They are really in for it. They wanted to be the king and queen. They wanted to feel they were better than everyone else. Let them even have a smidgen of that puffy look in prison, and they're going to get their asses stomped. Some join gangs. And could you imagine Chad joining a gang while he's in prison? I mean, what kind of gang are we talking about here? I mean, he'd have to in order to stay protected. I don't know. He might be the ass licker of the bunch. He might be the, what do they call it? The butt-e. You get what I'm saying? He's in a gang because he services these gang members. And again, y'all, this is reality. This isn't KJ just coming up with something out of my imagination. This stuff actually happens. And if you look at Lori, there are women in prison. There are women gangs too. What is Lori gonna? I'm the hairdresser. I have special privileges to be in your gang because I do your hair and I don't charge you anything. You just don't know, y'all. They may demand equal treatment but show little regard for fairness in prison. However, this is stereotypical thinking in some cases. Often the anger is turned inward, especially when it comes to inmates who aren't guilty. And of course, we know that Chad and Lori are guilty, so that doesn't apply. But just going down this thread of thinking and to give y'all complete information, it says they'll blame themselves for what brought them to this place, whether they actually committed a crime or not. And then this lifer talks about theirself again and says, in my case, even though I am innocent of what I'm charged with, I'm aware of what actions brought me to this place. I know choices I made in my life, while not criminal in nature, contributed to the circumstances surrounding this nightmare, and I find myself internalizing that anger often. And I know many of y'all know what I'm talking about. Anyone that's ever gone to prison for a long period of time or they're lifers, every damn one of them want to say they're innocent. So I'm not saying whoever this is, this anonymous lifer, is innocent. That's what they say, and everyone wants to be innocent. And I could see Chad and Lori in prison when someone comes up to Lori and says, I heard you murdered your children. I'm fixing to beat your ass. Lori could say, I didn't do it. I'm innocent. This was Chad and my brother Alex. Or Chad could be in prison, and y'all know men prisons, the male prisons, they don't like baby killers either. They don't like anyone that harms a child. Chad could say, that was that damn hussy. She had me pussy whooped. Sorry, y'all, but it's a fact. He could tell them, I had no idea her and her brother was going to do this. And they all want to say they're innocent. But I think we all know the deal. So you got denial, you got anger, and now you get to the bargaining of an incarcerated person. A sense of if only settles in. Like, if only my dad had been around. If only people would treat me fairly. And let me just stop there, because I got to thinking, what if Chad and Lori said, if only this or only that? What would they say? What about Chad? If only I would have been a good husband to my wife, Tammy, and not stuck my Johnson into that damn whore. What if I'd have just stayed with my wife and told Lori, I'm sorry, I'm flattered that you would want this, but you know, my belief system, my faith says I'm not supposed to commit adultery. I'm sorry, and I appreciate that you love my books, Lori, but you know, it can't happen that way. Or how about Lori, if only she would have really loved Charles Vallow and got the marriage counseling or whatever it was and got through that. And Lori could say, if only I would have been better to Charles Vallow. If only I would have put his happiness before my own. And you could even step back from that. Lori could say, if only I would have understood that Joe Ryan did everything for me. He helped me with my pageants. He was so supportive. He built me a great big house. He loved me. Charles Vallow loved me. You know, these only ifs. So you go back, if only. They may resort to making promises and deals with God or others. They promise to mend their ways in exchange for favors while they're spending the rest of their life in prison. Some inmates will attempt to turn to religion in an effort to make amends. Well, you know what? That's all Chad and Lori do. They turn to their fake-ass belief system that caused murder. So when they go to prison and they start that crap again, you know, it's going to be worse on them. This doesn't turn out well in a lot of cases when they go and start doing this bargaining, y'all. And y'all, this is exactly what happens to people when they go to prison for the rest of their life. And here we have this lifer again who says, there's a man on my block who recently found this out the hard way. Granted, he's mentally ill in the first place, but he was convinced that Jesus was going to get him out of here on his birthday. He'd been telling everyone on the block for months. His birthday was 2 days ago, and you guessed it, he's still here. He announced yesterday he no longer believed in Jesus, and he's been seriously depressed ever since. Now, I don't know about Chad and Lori thinking about Jesus, because they sure as heck didn't know the real Jesus or see Jesus face to face in any of this. But I could see them saying while they're in prison, doomsday's coming. You know, it's going to be any day now, or it's going to be this date, because Chad's in his jail cell going, I've seen it beyond the veil. And he starts telling everybody, get ready, it's fixing to be doomsday. And what happens? Doomsday comes and goes, just as it did when they both were sitting in jail cells, basically. So you have denial, you have anger, you have bargaining, and then what comes next? Depression. Feeling of hopelessness and sadness sink in when it's clear that anger or bargaining don't work. Depressed inmates tend to withdraw from others and focus on what they've lost. Sleep becomes an escape, especially when you aren't given a job or work to do. Inmates begin to face the consequences of their past actions. They grieve their loss of freedom and separation from loved ones. It's hard not being depressed in a place where you're not given any hope, where you don't have much to look forward to. And I'll tell you something. Chad and Lori, they're going to know, if they don't already know, I'm sure both of them are depressed right now. We just talked about it, over 1,020-something days for Lori sitting in a jail cell. Chad, a little over 900 days. There is no doubt that they both are in and out of depression. The way I see it is that they definitely, sleep becomes an escape. Chad and Lori both, what else do they have to do in there but sleep? And they're not in prison yet, so they don't get jail jobs to keep their asses busy. And this whole idea that they grieve the loss of their freedom, I'm almost positive this is what they're doing. They're grieving that. They can't be free again. They know they're not going to be free again. Just as I've said many times, and I will continue. They're like demons in a corner that can't get out. They grieve that loss of freedom, but this separation from their loved ones, who are we talking about here? Chad's going to grieve the loss of being away from Emma and Garth and the other children that he helped Tammy and him had together. He's going to grieve that. Well, he should have thought about that before he offed his wife for a damn prostitute. And Lori, what does she have to grieve? She's murdered her children. Kobe, you think she grieves the loss of Kobe? How about Sammy and Janice and Barry and Alex Cox? Not Alex. Yeah, well, Alex. Does she grieve about Alex being dead? Does she grieve over Adam Cox? Let me tell you something, y'all. This is way past for both of them. When they decided to murder, they don't have that feeling inside, in my opinion, of grieving that connection, that family love connection. There was no love at all between them to their loved ones if they were going to do what they did to their loved ones' loved ones. You get what I'm saying? But then we get to the one I brought up earlier that, many of y'all think, well, KJ, there is that one stage. It's acceptance. Well, I'm going to tell you what, not many people stay in that acceptance, but it would take many, many years for Chad and Lori both to accept the fact that they will never walk outside of a jail, prison again. But acceptance, some inmates begin to accept that they're in prison for the long haul, which can make some emotionally numb. Well, guess what, y'all? Chad and Lori were and are still and will always be emotionally numb. Because any mother that would allow her children to be murdered in the way that just murdered, and then you look at the way they were murdered, that makes a person totally a psychopath. They don't have that narcissism, that feeling inside of protection and love for your child. And Chad spent all those years with Tammy, and he didn't have any loyalty to her whatsoever. He didn't have a connection. The two become one when they were sealed in the temple. You see what I'm saying? Others experience genuine soul searching and accept some responsibility for their situation. Attitudes are improving. They fall into a routine and usually try to improve through reading, school, religious studies, or work. A sense of peace moves in, and many show a sincere desire to change. Acceptance is the hardest one to reach for a number of reasons. Regardless of the amount of time you have in prison, when you're not given a way to occupy your time, it's damn difficult to maintain hope. Now, this goes back to the lifer. He says, where I am now, due to many circumstances supposedly related to COVID, we have no education programs. There are limited job opportunities available, no rehab programs functioning, and I found mental health aid to be a joke. So what am I and others in here going to do with our time, says this lifer, this anonymous lifer. Personally, I do a lot of reading. Others do too, but for the most part, these men are just joshing around, watching whatever is on television, playing dominoes, and wasting away. And you know what, y'all? I don't have a problem saying it to you right now. I hope Chad and Lori waste away, because they wasted their lives of these innocent, beautiful children, Tammy and Charles. So they should know. They should live it out. You get what you give. That's the way I see it. To an extent, a lot of them that are lifers are at the point of acceptance, but acceptance of what? That their days are crawling by at the pace of a sloth. And you know, when I think about that, Chad and Lori's days are going to go so slow, just slow as a snail. And they're going to have to live in that. Just as Melanie Gibb, marinate. They're going to have to marinate in their environment of the jail walls, the bars, the sounds of the other inmates, the smells, the food that's disgusting. That this is their life. This is their life. It's going by so slowly. Until when? Until when? Until they get out? You know, y'all think about this. Chad and Lori, when they go to prison for the rest of their life, that thought's going to come in their head. They're going to say, well, when am I going to get out? How can I get out? And every time they're going to be met smack dab in the middle of, you're not getting out. It's always going to be a reality. They can run from it. They can disassociate from it. They can make up stuff and say, there's going to be a doomsday and the walls are going to fall down and I'm going to run out of here and run off to Guatemala and find the new gold plates or whatever. We aren't even being allowed to earn good time or work days because we aren't being allowed to work due to circumstances well beyond our control. Again, this is a lifer who's talking, and obviously he's wrote this during the COVID. But, you know, I don't know what kind of programs are going to be in the prisons for Chad and Lori. There are facilities here in the state who have job openings, but because of COVID, they're not allowing transfers. I would love to move on to acceptance, true acceptance, but at this point, I'm stuck in anger and depression, and I don't want to be there. Honestly, I'd really love to move on to going home. And that's something that Chad and Lori are always going to feel. No matter what stage of incarceration they're in, there's always going to be that unfulfilled feeling of, I want to go home, and know that they're not going home. That there is no home. If they got out of the jail today, what kind of home would they go to? Because Chad couldn't go back to his house. John Pryor owns it. Where's Lori going to go? Live with Janice or Summy? Well, I mean, what kind of home life are we talking about here? So those give you an idea of what Chad and Lori are going to go through as, you know, going from jail into prison. In my view, their incarceration of all these days, plus going into prison. It's all one big tamale to me. And that means when they're brought out in a pine box, okay? And so I thought, well, they're going to go through these stages of incarceration. They're going to be so busy because both of them, specifically Lori, who's narcissistic and only thinks of herself, and Chad, on the other hand, he's dumber than a damn doornail. I don't know how he's going to fare in prison other than to say he's not no alpha male. I mean, y'all, let's just get real with it. There is a pecking order in prison, and it all depends on your strength as a man, an alpha male, and he is not going to be anyone of stature in prison. He's going to be someone's bitch, okay? And Lori, on the other hand, I cannot see her. I absolutely cannot see her as one who would be willing to be an alpha female to beat up on other women or bully other women. She herself will be someone's little princess, if you know what I mean. You know, Lori will be the one that will have to do all these feminine things for these alpha females, these women, that are playing the role. Because trust me, y'all, it's a fact. I'm not making fun of it, y'all. I'm telling you, there are women in prison that are the dons. They are the more masculine, okay? It's just the way it is. And Lori's not going to be that. She's going to be somebody's little heifer. That's what she's going to be. And so they're going to be spending a lot of time through these stages of incarceration. And the question goes into what I wanted to talk about, and that is how can that allow Lori and Chad to hold on to their marriage, and how can that be something that keeps them alive in a good, positive way? Because again, when they go off to prison, y'all, they can call each other. They can write each other letters. I mean, let's just go down this road for sake of argument. They both go off for life in prison or death row, whichever. They're never getting out of prison, right? I mean, they could carry on. They could carry on through their incarceration, their whole relationship. There are people that are actually married to people on death row or life in prison. The only difference is there's usually only one that's in prison and the other one's out here in the world doing everything. So let's look at it. 7 signs your marriage is over, according to experts. Okay, so let's look at that. Let's say, well, we know Chad and Lori are in jail right now. We know they're going off to prison. One way or the other, they're not going to ever be able to touch each other again. They're never going to get to ever be James and Elena again. Will there be a divorce during this adjudication process? It's highly doubtful. After convictions, there's a possibility. The number one sign of a marriage is over is lack of sexual intimacy. In every marriage, sexual desires will change over time. And I can guarantee you right now, y'all, I can guarantee you that because Chad can't get his Johnson off of Lori and they can't have sex together, the whole aura, the whole thing, the whole role play, all of it is basically the whole foundation of their whole relationship, in my opinion. So you take that component away where they can't have sexual intercourse with one another. I mean, the only other thing I can come up with is what if she could write him explicit things in the mail or talk dirty to him on the phone? I mean, I guess it depends on what the prisons would allow in terms of letters. I'm pretty sure they don't allow you to write nasty, sexual porno stuff in mail to prisoners. Now, I don't know whether they allow them to speak dirty to one another over prison phones. Those are recorded. So, I mean, I don't know. Does anybody want to put in the comments? Are you allowed to write those sexy letters to someone in prison? Or can you talk, sexual or whatever over the phone? Regardless, y'all, the bottom line is this. How can that take the place of what James and Elena were doing in the hotel room or in Charles Vallow's house or anything else for that matter? The sexual intimacy is gone. It's gone. The next thing is frequently feeling angry with your spouse. Wonder if Lori feels angry at Chad right now. I think she does. I don't think Chad is angry at Lori at all, y'all. I think Chad has been caught with his fly down in terms of him and her. This I've always said they were even Steven. So this whole idea that he indoctrinated her, she was already on that road. They got together and they did all the indoctrinating to each other, even Steven. Okay, but I do believe Lori is angry at Chad because she's sitting in jail and Chad promised her that this was all going to work out. Remember, Rob Woods said to Summer Shiflett, he said, Lori was going to talk to us, but Chad talked her out of it. And Chad could have come at any time after Lori's arrest and say, you know what, I don't know what in the hell's going on. You know, this woman, I married her. I thought everything was fine. She told me that, you know, this or this or this. Her and her brother must have done this. But he didn't. He and her both knew just by that recorded phone call the day the children's bodies were found. They both knew that the jig was up. It was over. But the whole time before that, they could have told them, hey, the kids are in the backyard. But they didn't, because they felt like if the children's bodies weren't found, that they were in the free and clear. You see? Another thing that whether or not Chad and Lori's marriage could be over is dreading spending alone time together. Okay, well, they don't get no alone time. But let's look at the last hearing. They both, for the first time, were sitting. I don't know if they were sitting at the same table or not. I haven't seen anything online. I've been looking for someone who was at that actual hearing who could tell me, you know, where they were sitting and what was going on. But they're dreading spending time alone time together. I think Chad was dreading even being in Lori's presence. I think Lori's been waiting to see Chad. I think Lori wanted to see Chad. I think Lori was giddy to see Chad. I think Lori's always going to feel like that is her king, her high priest, or whatever the hell they saw in each other other than sex. But Chad, on the other hand, I know you could just tell by the way he walked out of the courthouse. He couldn't get out of there fast enough. And they didn't stay for the whole hearing, which did absolutely. Even though they were Archie's motions, it does affect things. And John Pryor, if he'd have been a smart defense attorney, would have stayed for the whole hearing. But just because they were Archie's motions didn't mean that John Pryor had to take Chad Daybell away. He did that strategically. He didn't want Chad in there any longer than he had to be. Just as the times before, he would duck out on Chad and Lori being in the same room together. He couldn't help it this time because he knew damn well Judge Boyce was fixing to announce April 3rd of 2023. So that tells me very clearly, y'all, in my opinion, that John Pryor strategically got Chad out of there as soon as the pretrial conference, scheduling conference, excuse me, y'all, was over. John Pryor was out the door with Chad. They didn't want to be around Lori. Okay, so another sign that your marriage might be over is lack of respect. Well, how would we discern that? I mean, folks, let me just get real with you. How in the hell? How in the hell could Chad respect Lori and Lori respect Chad when they were doing all this stuff? That is disgusting. We're talking about real civility, real respect. There couldn't be any of that there. Self-respect, specifically. But we're talking about respect for the other spouse. Lori and Chad did all of this. The money fraud, the murders, all of that together. And they could respect each other? No, I don't think so. So there you go on that. Lack of trust. Oh, let me tell you what. Chad trusted Lori, and Lori trusted Chad. They did all the way through it. And we're not talking about good, wholesome trust. We're talking about who the hell else? Who the hell else were they going to trust? Now some of y'all say, well, Lori trusted Alex because he was her protector. Well, let me just lay this out here. When Chad and Lori got together, Alex knew he wasn't Lori's priority anymore. And Chad tried to give him a blessing and tell him to go off with Zulema and all this other stuff so that Lori and Chad could go on. But you know what, y'all? There's no doubt in my mind. Alex was jealous of all that. But Lori, she stopped making barking the orders to Alex by allowing Alex to get that from Chad. And it was a transfer, basically, of power. Lori had power over Alex. Lori gave that power to Chad, and Alex knew that if Lori gave that to Chad and he didn't listen to Chad, if Alex didn't listen to Chad, it would make his sister unhappy. So, and then, of course, we hear Chad was giving Alex all these compliments and telling him he was all these things. I mean, Lori didn't have to tell Alex any of that to get him to do anything she wanted him. All she had to do was gaslight his ass, possibly over him wanting to have sex with her when she was young. But Lori wasn't one that was going to sit there and build her brother Alex up. She was going to gaslight him and be angry with him just as she was. Someone said they heard them arguing over there in Texas when she lived with him briefly. But Chad was different than Lori in that he built Alex up. Made Alex believe, you're multiple probations in the past. You were a great man. You lived here. You did so many good things for all these people. And he even sprinkles it about how he was good to children and stuff, knowing good and damn well that he and Lori both, together in a consensus, barked orders to Alex to murder JJ and Tylee. That's my opinion. And so Chad had to smooth that over. He had to smooth that over by saying, he might as well have said, Alex, we had to do this with JJ and Tylee, but hey, I want you to know, don't feel any guilt over it, because in my blessing, I'm telling you, you did so much for children and you were so heroic and all this and that. The bottom line is that Alex at one point, well, not one point, many points in Lori's existence, before Chad stepped into that role, he lived with her. He was around her all the time. He might as well been a surrogate parent or a surrogate spouse. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying they had sexual relationship, Alex and his sister, as adults. I'm just saying, if her brother's living with her and she has no other man in her life, he is the man of the house. And then Chad walks in the door. And Chad is now the man of the house, even though Chad doesn't want to be the man of the house with the children involved. He wants to get rid of them. And so does Lori. So you've got a dislike of your spouse. And I don't think Lori dislikes Chad at all. I think she absolutely thinks that he's the bee's knees. But Chad does not like Lori, y'all. That is my opinion. His body language, the way that John Pryor has been strategic about this whole situation. In John Pryor's motions, he's talked about his diametrically different defense than Lori's, calling her Valo instead of Daybell. The fact that Emma's coming out to say that Lori and Alex did all this and framed her father. Chad does not like Lori and will never like Lori again. But Lori will never stop wanting Chad. Visions of the future do not include your spouse, is one of the 7 signs your marriage is over. And that's exactly what happened with Chad and Tammy. He didn't want a future with Tammy. He didn't see himself. He'd been talking about her dying since 2015. So it wasn't no new concept for him. And Lori had been from husband to husband to husband. She never really thought about it. She never, she didn't take the time really. It was too much about herself. But visions of the future, and it's funny, visions of the future, visions. Like Chad and Lori, either one could have visions. If they could really see beyond the veil or any of this shit, they wouldn't be sitting in jail cells heading to life in prison or death row right now. But Chad, if he's sitting in a jail cell right now and he thinks about Lori, Does he think he has a future with her? No. He's as far away from her in his mind as he possibly can be right now. But guess what? This is the pleasurable part for me anyway. There's no way around the fact that he's going to always have Lori in his, in his mind here and there. And the same for Lori. I mean, there's no way they can block out each other at all. They're going to always have to think about what they did for the other person. And that's disgusting. You're always criticizing each other. Well, I'll tell you, in legalese, the only one I see that's been doing any criticizing is John Pryor, Chad Daybell. Chad Daybell's the one that's criticizing Lori, okay? I have not seen anything about Lori criticizing Chad. So that's another thing. Lack of intimacy, we've gone over that. Constantly having the same argument. Okay, well, they do have the same argument. And that is they both think each other are guilty, or at least that's their defense. I mean, the antagonistic defense has been brought up. So the argument is, legally, that Chad thinks Lori and Alex did it, and Lori thinks that Chad did it, or Alex. I mean, I'm not even quite sure what Lori's going to say. I mean, is she going to say that, well, Alex got buddy-buddy with Chad and they did this behind my back? I mean, I haven't really thought about that. But when you're having that argument between defense teams, because they're co-defendants now, I see quite clearly that Chad has criticized Lori. There is no intimacy there. They're having an argument about this thing. They aren't communicating. They're not allowed to communicate. What would happen if the judge said, okay, we're headed for trial, and I do have this order that they're not allowed to communicate because they're co-defendants in a conspiracy to commit murder trial, but I'm going to lift that. Okay? So would they communicate? And what would they say? They wouldn't say much. Number one, I don't think either defense attorneys would even allow them to, even if they could. You don't enjoy spending time together anymore. Well, I'll tell you what, before they got busted, they thought they had the world at their feet. They were just as happy as they thought they could be, going to Hawaii, doing everything they did. Everything, I mean, it was almost like they were just so... I don't know how else to say it. They didn't acknowledge what was going on around them. It was like, we are immune from any of this. Even when Nate Eaton says, where are the kids, where are the kids? Yes, Chad had a really kind of weird look on his face, but Lori, she just acted oblivious, like it didn't matter. You are keeping secrets or lying to your spouse is a sign that your marriage is going to be over with. All right, let's look at that. Are you keeping secrets? Chad could easily say, Lori kept all this shit from me. She told me she was rich. She told me that, this or that. But what could Lori say? What kind of secrets could Chad have kept from Lori? The only real secret that I think he knew all along, even way before he met Lori, is he was full of shit. He couldn't see beyond the veil. He didn't have near-death experiences. That was something I really believe Chad Daybell, deep down inside of him, knew he was full of shit. But he knew that it made him look good. He saw what happened to Suzanne Freeman and Julie Rowe and other people and how they were making money and stuff. And he just grasped hold of whatever he thought was going to make him famous. Lack of trust, which I've already been over. You are having an affair is a reason that a marriage is over. Well, I guarantee you all this. When Chad and Lori go to prison, one or the other or both are going to be someone's sexual partner in prison. I mean, you can be sure of it. Y'all think I'm just making a joke of this? Trust me when I say there are going to be women in prison that are going to take a look at Lori and they're going to go, this one's mine. And then you got people like Bubba in prison who's an alpha male who's going to look at Chad, his dorky ass, and want to teach him a few lessons. You're emotionally relying on another person, and that is why your marriage is over. And yes, folks, Chad Daybell's going to have to emotionally rely on someone, whether it's someone in prison or a cellmate or something. He's going to, those emotions that a man feels, and y'all know what I'm talking about, he's going to have to rely on somebody because he's going to be there the rest of his life. And Lori, women are creatures of emotion. She's got to vent out and express emotions that a woman feels. She's going to have to, she's going to rely on somebody when she goes to prison. Is that going to keep a marriage of Lori and Chad together, knowing that Bubba's bending over Chad and Jacinda's over here braiding Lori's hair? You'll see. You'll see what I mean. And finally, the last thing is an obvious one, and that is there is abuse in the marriage. And if you think about Chad and Lori that got married November the 5th, they were both abusive to each other in terms of they lied to one another. They kept the whole thing up. They had no respect in each other. The abuse that it was self-imposed, along with the fact that them getting married, everything was done together. So they were abusive to one another. Abuse, y'all, can include lying to yourself. Abuse can include telling the other person they're someone that they're not and convincing them of that. And Lori wanted to believe that Chad was this high priest and she was a priestess, the warrior beyond the millennia. They wanted to play the roles. And, the sexual role playing throughout, whether it was during the adulterous time or once they got married, that is abusive to me for both of them. And they damn well deserve it. So, those are the signs of whether a marriage is going to stay together. It's my opinion that a few years will go by as they go through these stages of incarceration and a divorce decree will ensue. They will not stay legally married, in my opinion. Now, some say, well, KJ, they feel like, Chad, he was married to Tammy and sealed in the temple with her. And then him and Lori they did the so-called sealing in the temple. Don't you find it interesting that they got actually physically married on a beach? So could that have been Chad's second wife in terms of polygamy? The bottom line is, some people would say they're going to stay married the rest of their life because they don't want to accept that what their diabolical, evil-ass relationship and marriage, what they had to do to get that. They could have gotten it any other way. Chad could have divorced Tammy. Lori could have divorced Charles, and they could have gotten together that way. There was all kinds of options there. But they went down the road they did. And anything that's built on evil and just pure, disgusting, diabolical, just criminality, it can't last. I mean, can you see Lori 20 years down the road sitting in prison thinking about, when I first met Chad? Her thoughts would immediately have to go to, yes, it was, I went and I lied to myself and thought it was so beautiful and everything was coming together. But then she would have to automatically see what it produced. It's a lot like these people that think, I'm going to commit adultery on my spouse to get with this other person and marry them, and it's going to be better, But then they'll always know that even if they get married, that they were committing adultery before they entered this marriage. And that's something that will always be in the back of my ex-husband's mind. He left me with my children and everything. And he's still married to this woman that he committed adultery on with. But that doesn't mean they have that where what are they just going to forget that he was cheating on me? And that she knew she was cheating with a married man? I mean, it's just, it is what it is. But leave y'all's comments. Let me know what you think. I'm going to pose the question to you. That is, do you think that Chad and Lori take their marriage vows seriously as they go through these stages in incarceration? How can they fully enjoy their marriage, spending the rest of their lives in prison, or anything, just any comments you might have on it. So for any of y'all that heard me say some pretty foul things, please forgive me. But it's Saturday night, and I will put on here, no children allowed. I thank y'all. I wanted to get with y'all on a Saturday night. And keep on looking.